Congo War Curiosities. The Congo Wars hold secrets that sound like fiction but are horrifyingly real. Let me share with you facts that will change how you see this conflict forever. First, the cell phone connection you need to understand. Right now, in your pocket, you're carrying a piece of the Congo. That smartphone required coltan, a mineral that during the Second Congo War became more valuable than gold. In the year 2000, coltan prices exploded to $600 per kilogram because of the PlayStation 2 launch and the mobile phone boom. Armed groups in eastern Congo immediately intensified fighting over mining areas. Soldiers would abandon their positions to dig for coltan because they could make more money in a day of mining than a month of military salary. This created a bizarre situation where opposing armies would sometimes work side by side in the same mine during informal truces, only to fight each other hours later over control of that same territory. Here's something that sounds impossible. During the war, Rwanda, a country smaller than Maryland with no significant mineral deposits of its own, suddenly became one of the world's largest exporters of coltan, diamonds, and gold. The only problem: Rwanda doesn't have these minerals. They were systematically looted from Congo, flown across the border, and sold on international markets with Rwandan certificates of origin. A UN investigation found that the Rwandan army made an estimated $250 million from this mineral smuggling between 1998 and 2000 alone. The investigators documented how military transport planes would fly into Congo loaded with weapons and fly out heavy with minerals. The scale of this conflict defies comprehension. We call it Africa's World War, and that's not hyperbole. At its peak, 9 countries were involved with armies on Congolese soil. But here's the terrifying part: military combat caused less than 10% of the deaths. The real killer was the collapse of society. Imagine this: a pregnant woman in a village goes into labor with complications. Normally treatable, but the hospital was looted 3 months ago, the doctor fled, and there are no medical supplies within 200 kilometers. She dies from hemorrhaging. A 5-year-old gets malaria, normally curable with basic medication, but there's no clinic, no medicine, no transportation to the nearest town. He dies. Multiply this by millions. That's how a war kills 5.4 million people while most never see a soldier. Sexual violence reached levels that created a new vocabulary of horror. The Panzi Hospital in Bukavu began seeing injuries so severe that doctors had never encountered them in medical literature. Women and girls were raped with such brutality, often with objects like rifle barrels, broken bottles, or sticks, that they required reconstructive surgery just to perform basic bodily functions. Dr. Mukwege documented cases of babies as young as 6 months and elderly women in their 80s being assaulted. Entire villages were subjected to mass rape as a deliberate military strategy to terrorize populations into fleeing, abandoning mineral-rich land. Some armed groups required new recruits to rape family members as initiation, destroying community bonds and creating soldiers who could never return home. Here's something almost nobody knows: child soldiers weren't just victims, they became some of the most feared fighters. Armed groups would abduct children, sometimes as young as 7, drug them with a mixture that included gunpowder, and send them into combat. These children were given AK-47s, weapons specifically designed to be so simple that minimal training was needed. Commanders preferred child soldiers because they followed orders without question, demanded less pay, required less food, and could be more easily indoctrinated. Some estimates suggest over 30,000 children served as soldiers during the conflict. Many were forced to kill their own family members or villagers to psychologically bind them to their units, making return to civilian life nearly impossible. The economics of this war were insane. A 2002 UN report revealed that military officers on all sides became millionaires while their soldiers went unpaid. Zimbabwean generals secured diamond mining concessions. Ugandan officers controlled gold mines. Even peacekeeping forces weren't immune. UN investigators documented cases of peacekeepers trading weapons for gold with the very militias they were supposed to disarm. The war became a business opportunity, and ending it meant losing profit. This created perverse incentives where military leaders on opposing sides had more interest in maintaining low-level conflict than achieving victory or peace. Laurent Kabila, who started the first war to overthrow Mobutu, was assassinated in 2001 by one of his own child bodyguards. The circumstances remain murky, but evidence suggests he was killed because he'd become a liability to those profiting from the war. His son, Joseph Kabila, who was only 29 years old and had been a military commander in the East, was immediately sworn in as president. Some questioned whether he was even Lawrence's biological son, but he ruled for 18 years, from 2001 to 2019, overseeing a country still mired in conflict while reportedly amassing a fortune through mining concessions and shell companies. The international community's response was pathetically inadequate. The UN peacekeeping mission, MONUC, later MONUSCO, became one of the largest and most expensive peacekeeping operations in history, costing billions annually. Yet peacekeepers often stood by during atrocities. In 2004 in Bukavu, UN forces watched as armed groups took over the city. Their rules of engagement prevented intervention unless directly attacked. This created situations where blue-helmeted soldiers would be stationed hundreds of meters from ongoing massacres, unable or unwilling to act. Perhaps most disturbing is how normalized the violence became. In eastern Congo, entire generations have grown up knowing only war. Children play games imitating massacres they've witnessed. The Swahili phrase, kulala inya, sleeping outside, became common, meaning fleeing into the forest when militias approached your village. Some communities developed warning systems with drums or phone trees to alert neighbors of approaching fighters, a necessary survival adaptation to perpetual insecurity. This is the reality of the Congo Wars, a conflict where international economics, local politics, ethnic tensions, and resource greed created a perfect storm of human suffering that continues today in eastern Congo, where over 120 armed groups still operate, and the war never really ended. Chapter 1: The Heart of Darkness, Geography and Natural Wonders. Welcome to an extraordinary journey through one of Earth's most fascinating and misunderstood regions, the Congo. When we speak of the Congo, we're actually referring to two nations, the Republic of the Congo and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, formerly known as Zaire. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DRC, is the second largest country in Africa, spanning over 2.3 million square kilometers. That's roughly the size of Western Europe. The Congo River, the deepest river in the world, reaches depths of over 220 meters in some places. It's the second longest river in Africa after the Nile, stretching approximately 4,700 kilometers. This mighty river is so powerful that it's the only major river to cross the equator twice, creating a unique ecosystem that defies conventional geographical patterns. The Congo Basin contains the world's second largest rainforest after the Amazon, covering approximately 500 million acres across 6 countries. This rainforest is often called the planet's second lung, because it absorbs massive amounts of carbon dioxide and produces oxygen essential for global climate regulation. The biodiversity here is staggering. Scientists estimate that the Congo Basin is home to over 10,000 species of plants, 1,000 species of birds, and 400 species of mammals, many found nowhere else on Earth. Within this green cathedral live some of our closest relatives, the bonobos and gorillas. The bonobo, found only in the DRC, shares approximately 98.7% of its DNA with humans and exhibits remarkable social behaviors, including conflict resolution through cooperation rather than aggression. Mountain gorillas, critically endangered with only about 1,000 individuals remaining, inhabit the volcanic mountains along the DRC's eastern border. The geological wealth of the Congo is equally impressive. The region sits atop some of the world's richest mineral deposits, including diamonds, gold, copper, cobalt, and coltan, a mineral essential for modern electronics like smartphones and laptops. In fact, the DRC produces approximately 70% of the world's cobalt supply. This immense natural wealth, paradoxically, has been both a blessing and a curse, fueling conflicts that we'll explore in later chapters. Chapter 2: Ancient Kingdoms and Colonial Tragedy. Long before European colonization, the Congo region was home to sophisticated kingdoms and societies. The Kingdom of Congo, established around the 14th century, was a highly organized state with a complex political structure, trade networks, and artistic traditions. When Portuguese explorers arrived in 1482, they found a kingdom that rivaled European nations in organization and culture. The Congo king, known as the Mana Congo, ruled over a territory that stretched across parts of modern-day Angola, Republic of Congo, and DRC. However, the arrival of Europeans marked the beginning of one of history's darkest chapters. The transatlantic slave trade devastated the region for over 3 centuries, with millions of Africans forcibly taken from their homelands. But the worst was yet to come. In 1885, at the Berlin Conference, European powers carved up Africa among themselves without a single African representative present. King Leopold II of Belgium claimed the Congo Free State as his personal property, not as a Belgian colony, but as his private possession. What followed was genocide on a massive scale. Leopold's regime, obsessed with extracting rubber and ivory, implemented a system of forced labor so brutal that it shocked even other colonial powers. Villages were required to meet rubber quotas. Failure meant punishment, hands were cut off, villages were burned, and families were held hostage. The chikot, a whip made of hippopotamus hide, became a symbol of terror. Leopold's private army, the force publique, was required to prove they hadn't wasted bullets by bringing back severed hands for each shot fired. Conservative estimates suggest that between 1885 and 1908, the population of the Congo Free State was reduced by half. Approximately 10 million people died from murder, starvation, disease, and exhaustion. International outrage, led by activists like Edmund Dean Morel and Roger Casement, eventually forced Leopold to relinquish control. In 1908, the Belgian government took over, creating the Belgian Congo. While conditions improved marginally, the colonial system continued to exploit Congolese resources and labor. The Belgian colonial philosophy of paternalism kept Congolese people from positions of power, denied higher education, and maintained strict racial segregation. The echoes of this colonial trauma continue to reverberate through Congolese society today, shaping political instability, economic challenges, and regional conflicts that persist into the 21st century. Chapter 3: Independence and the Cold War Proxy. The wind of change swept across Africa in the 1960s, and on June 30, 1960, the Belgian Congo gained independence, becoming the Republic of the Congo. The nation's first democratically elected prime minister was Patrice Lumumba, a charismatic leader who envisioned a truly independent and unified Congo free from foreign interference. Lumumba's independence speech shocked Belgian officials in attendance. Rather than offering gratitude, he spoke truth about colonial brutality. "We have known ironies, insults, blows that we endured morning, noon, and evening, because we are Negroes." His vision was Pan-African unity and economic independence, which immediately made him a threat to Western interests during the Cold War. Within weeks of independence, the mineral-rich Katanga province, encouraged and supported by Belgian mining interests, declared secession under Moise Tshombe. The new nation descended into chaos. The Congolese army mutinied, and violence erupted across the country. Lumumba appealed to the United Nations for help, but when that assistance proved inadequate, he turned to the Soviet Union, a decision that sealed his fate. The United States, viewing Lumumba as a communist threat in resource-rich Africa, worked with Belgian intelligence and Congolese politicians to remove him. CIA documents declassified decades later confirmed American involvement in plots against Lumumba's life. In September 1960, President Joseph Kasavubu, with Western backing, dismissed Lumumba. Colonel Joseph Desire Mobutu, a former Army Chief of Staff who had been on the CIA payroll, staged a coup. In January 1961, Lumumba was captured, tortured, and executed by firing squad in Katanga with Belgian officers present. His body was dissolved in acid to prevent his grave from becoming a rallying point. He was only 35 years old. Lumumba became a martyr for African independence and anti-colonialism, his image appearing alongside Che Guevara in revolutionary iconography worldwide. Mobutu initially stepped back, but in 1965, he seized power permanently in a second coup, again with Western support. He would rule for 32 years, transforming the country into a kleptocracy. In 1971, as part of his authenticity campaign, he renamed the country Zaire and himself Mobutu Sese Seko Kuku Ngbendu Wazabunga, which roughly translates to the all-powerful warrior who, because of his endurance and inflexible will to win, goes from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. Mobutu's rule epitomized Cold War hypocrisy. Despite massive corruption and human rights abuses, he received billions in Western aid because he positioned himself as an anti-communist bulwark. He amassed a personal fortune estimated at $5 billion while his country's infrastructure crumbled and its people suffered in poverty. Chapter 4: Africa's World War, the deadliest conflict since 1945. The Rwandan genocide of 1994 didn't end at Rwanda's borders. It spilled into eastern Congo, triggering what would become the deadliest conflict since World War II. After Hutu extremists murdered approximately 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus in Rwanda, over 2 million Hutu refugees, including genocidaires, those who had committed genocide, fled into eastern Zaire, settling in massive refugee camps. These camps became bases for Hutu militias who launched attacks back into Rwanda. The Mobutu regime, weakened and corrupt, did nothing to stop them. In 1996, Rwanda and Uganda decided to act, supporting Laurent Desire Kabila, a longtime opponent of Mobutu, to lead a rebellion. The Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo Zaire swept across the country with surprising speed. Mobutu, dying of cancer and abandoned by his Western patrons after the Cold War ended, fled in May 1997. He died in exile 4 months later. Kabila declared himself president and renamed the country the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But Kabila quickly soured his relationship with his Rwandan and Ugandan backers, ordering them out of the country in 1998. In response, they invaded again, this time supporting different rebel groups. The difference now was that other African nations entered the conflict. Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia sent troops to support Kabila's government. Chad and Sudan also became involved. At its peak, 9 African nations and approximately 25 armed groups were fighting in what became known as Africa's World War, or the Great War of Africa. The war was fundamentally about control of the DRC's vast mineral wealth. Eastern Congo became a nightmare of overlapping conflicts. Different armies and militias controlled mining areas, extracting diamonds, gold, coltan, and other minerals to fund their operations. A 2001 UN report detailed how the conflict had become self-financing through resource extraction, with military officers and political leaders on all sides profiting from the war economy. The humanitarian catastrophe was unprecedented in modern African history. A 2008 study by the International Rescue Committee estimated that 5.4 million people had died as a result of the conflict between 1998 and 2007, making it the deadliest conflict worldwide since World War II. The vast majority didn't die from violence directly but from disease, malnutrition, and the collapse of healthcare systems. Malaria, diarrheal diseases, and respiratory infections killed people who would have survived with basic medical care. Sexual violence became a weapon of war on a massive scale. Tens of thousands of women and girls were raped, often with extreme brutality designed to terrorize and destroy communities. The eastern city of Bukavu became known as the rape capital of the world. Even after a peace agreement in 2002 and official end to the war in 2003, violence continued in eastern Congo, where it persists today. Chapter 5: Blood Minerals and the Smartphone in Your Pocket. There's a direct connection between the device you're watching this on and the ongoing conflict in the Congo. The minerals extracted from Congolese soil are essential components of modern technology, and the trade in these blood minerals, or conflict minerals, continues to fuel violence and human suffering. Coltan, short for columbite tantalite, is refined into tantalum, a heat-resistant powder that holds electrical charge, making it essential for capacitors in smartphones, laptops, and other electronics. Approximately 60% of the world's coltan reserves are in the DRC. During the Second Congo War, coltan prices skyrocketed due to the boom in mobile phone production, intensifying fighting over mining areas in eastern Congo. The mining conditions are horrific. In artisanal mines, men, women, and children dig in hand-carved tunnels that frequently collapse, killing miners. There's no safety equipment, no structural support, and no emergency services. Miners work in mud and water, exposed to toxic substances, for perhaps a few dollars a day. Children as young as 7 work in these mines instead of attending school. Armed groups control many mining areas, taxing miners and traders at every step. A 2015 UN group of experts report documented how armed groups earned millions annually from mining activities. This creates a vicious cycle. Minerals fund armed groups maintain control through violence, and violence forces vulnerable populations into dangerous mining work. The 3Ts and G, tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, are the primary conflict minerals from the DRC. They pass through complex supply chains, often smuggled into neighboring countries like Rwanda or Uganda, where they're laundered into the legitimate international market. This makes tracking their origin extremely difficult. In 2010, the United States passed the Dodd-Frank Act, Section 1502, requiring companies to disclose whether their products contain conflict minerals from the DRC or surrounding countries. The European Union passed similar legislation in 2017. These laws aim to create transparency and pressure companies to ensure their supply chains don't fund armed groups. However, the reality is complicated. Some argue these regulations have led to a de facto embargo, with companies avoiding Congolese minerals entirely, devastating the livelihoods of legitimate miners. Others point out that without such pressure, there's no incentive for supply chain reform. Mining cooperatives and certification schemes have emerged, attempting to create conflict-free mineral supply chains, but challenges remain enormous. Major technology companies have responded differently. Apple claims its products use conflict-free minerals and publishes detailed supply chain reports. Other companies have been less transparent. The Enough Project, an advocacy organization, publishes annual rankings of companies' efforts to source conflict-free minerals, creating consumer pressure for corporate responsibility. The fundamental issue remains: as long as there's demand for minerals and weak governance in mining regions, armed groups will profit from extraction, and vulnerable people will suffer in mines.